third place is a place which is not your home and which is not your work.
So I think that is very crucial in these intolerant times, that people come together and you have a say, because
So welcome everyone once again on our channel, and today we have with us Etienne Dodat, who's based in Singapore, and he's actually French. So uh, today I'll just let him introduce himself and let him tell you what he wants to talk about today. He's got a very interesting topic to talk about. So over to you, Etienne.
All right. So hello, everyone. And again, very happy to be with you today. So yes, I'm a French software engineering manager, if I define myself by my job, but this plays a role in the topic I'm going to talk about today. So I'm about 40 years old. I've been living in France for most of my life. And actually, I moved to Singapore 5 years ago. And I work in software engineering. So the topic I wanted to discuss today is kind of intimidating. It's a large topic. It's about logical thinking and reasoning. And I want really to share some observations about how reasoning, I think, has reduced a lot and how it's lacking today. While at the same time, we have some big challenges to solve, right? Like climate change, pandemics, demographics, and stuff like that. So it's not a new topic. There is a lot of literature about it. There are many books about how facts are being questioned today and challenged versus like decisions made out of emotions and stuff like that. There is a lot of things around conspiracy theories, as you already know. So I will not give a lecture about the topic. That's not the point. But again, I'll be sharing some observations and a few dots I've been connecting more recently, because I've been interested in this topic in the last 6 months, and I've been reading on this topic. So I'm here again to share my own experience, my observations, and some of the readings I had recently. So, okay, let's again get back to the main topic: reasoning, logical thinking, fact-based decision making, you can name it. And the question is, why is it important for me? So again, I define myself in my intro as a French engineer. And actually, it turns out that both terms play a role here. So of course, as an engineer, I attach a lot of importance to scientific methods. And in my job, in my day-to-day job, I manage software engineering teams. And when people ask me, like, what is the most important skill you need, right? Whether it's this coding language or this database or whatever, actually the most important skill for an engineering team is to make informed decisions. That's the most important skill in my day-to-day work. So the rest is techniques, but the most important skills is for a team to come together, to share different perspectives, to measure, like evaluate each of the different options we have, and then make a decision, right? So this is really something at the core of my job. And then, as I said, I come from French background. So I come from the French education system, which has a pretty interesting exposure to rational thinking, in a sense. And this is explained, I'm sure it's not the only educational system with this strong footprint of rational thinking, but still French history is slightly special in that sense. So a lot of how French education system today kind of dates back to the French Revolution, which was like a bit more than 2 centuries ago. And the French Revolution itself, that's a topic also I've been quite interested in. It's not just about some poor people uprising against the king, right? That's what happened. But actually, the French Revolution was a result of much larger changes in how people think. I recommend the Wikipedia article about the Enlightenment period. So the Enlightenment period happened before the revolution, and it's more like a philosophical movement where the reasoning, the science is brought at the center and is actually made to, it's really considered to be like the way to decide and run governments rather than the traditional monarchy and religion beliefs and stuff like that, right? So soon back then in France, people were thinking that, okay, the individual liberty progress is more important, and the way to run a democracy and run a country is not based on religious beliefs, but it should be based on science and reason. Okay, so that's kind of the background where upon which like the French education system was built until today. So until today, the French education system has a lot of emphasis on critical thinking. And I've seen this, I mean, my family has two cultures. My wife is Korean, and I live in Singapore. So I've seen how other education systems, for instance, in Asia work. And sometimes I feel like some systems are heavily relying on facts and memorization, where again, in France, we encourage like thinking, critical thinking. Typically, when you are being brought a question as a French student, like any question around art, science, or whatever, you are being asked an opinion. And the idea is not to say yes or no, it's to say why it would be this way, but why it can be the other way as well. So you're always encouraged to explain like the two different perspectives on the same problem, rather than taking a position and just defending your case. So that's where I'm coming from. And that's why it's deeply ingrained in myself that it's so important to take time to think before you make a decision. So that's kind of my extended introduction. So yeah, now I can share some, again, observations and readings about what happened to logical thinking and reasoning.
So you want to say, you want to talk about the history of it, or you want to talk about the current scenario, or like what can happen in the future, or what are the possibilities, or what are the benefits of it? Exactly what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so I want to talk about the current situation, okay, what I've observed around me, and what does the literature say about today's world and how people make decisions today, basically. So we won't go back to history.
Okay. Also, I want to like acknowledge, like it's very nicely expressed by Etienne, that it's not always like how, why it is this way, but why it can also be the other way. So I really like that point.
Yeah. So, okay, again, I started really looking into this topic, I would say in the last year or so, to be honest, because I made like, I looked at my life and I was thinking that, oh, I spend less time reading, I'm spending more time watching videos on internet, so I spend less time reflecting on things. I was also thinking that there is kind of a lack of diversity in my social environment. I mean, I live in Singapore. It's kind of a country where people are selected based out of money. So you don't happen to meet very different people, to be honest. And again, on my online activity, when watching things on internet, I feel like there is not a lot of different perspectives. So I was thinking that I was feeling this lack of time to reflect and lack of perspectives. I was also observing like what happens with the questioning on science recently. Like we've seen, especially in the US, like questioning of the theory of evolution. We've seen people questioning climate change. We've seen even people questioning the existence of pandemic, right? And we've seen like a lot of debates around vaccinations. And every time I see these topics, I feel like all these debates are not real debates. People are not discussing like science facts, but instead they are just taking positions, sometimes politically based, sometimes religion based. So all these things, they kind of added up in my mind, and I started looking into this topic. So I read some books recently about it. So one book, which is a French one, so very difficult to translate, which is very recent. It was released a few months back. So it actually talks also about the pandemics. It explains how many things today are built to call to our emotions instead of calling to our reason. So the guy is explaining about e-commerce websites, TV channels, social networks. And I'd go briefly on the different points he makes. So to start with e-commerce websites, his point is that these are made to appeal to emotions and satisfactions. So especially through the recommendation engines, the way these algorithms work is to just give you more of what you like already, right? So it's purely based on satisfaction, which is a basic feeling. So sometimes they also try to make you a bit scared, saying that, oh, we have only 3 of these items in stock, so you want to buy faster, right? So all these mechanisms are solely made to appeal to your emotions. And that's true with all recommendations engines out there, right? When you type stuff on Google, when you want to watch Netflix, I mean, we are bringing you content that you like already. And this is, again, not something new. TV channels, they also became less oriented towards debates, as you observed. We have continuous information channels, and some of them are very, I would say, I mean, these are not debates. You have people like having very strong positions and trying to explain their points, but without really like discussing together. And many people complain that some of these channels are for the show rather than for real information. Social networks is also how social networks are built, especially things like Instagram or Twitter, are also definitely built for calling to the emotional part of your brain. Like how can you have a constructive discussion on Twitter if you have 200 words, right? So we've seen what Twitter became, and the Trump era didn't help. Instagram is also made for having like nice pictures and glorified reality. So all these things belong to this same topic that, okay, we are trying to manipulate people's emotion rather than trying to make them think about a topic. And there is another book that I read super recently. So this one is in English. Here it is, The Death of Truth. So this one is a book written at the beginning of the Trump era. And this is more political. but this goes along the same lines. This is someone from the New York Times, if I'm correct, or from the Washington Post, who actually explained that, from the New York Times. She explained that Trump and people around Trump had an agenda specifically around denying facts, building alternative realities. And her point is that it's really intentional how Trump and people around Trump behaves. And it's actually an agenda that dates back to the 70s, where there is a philosophy called postmodernism, which is exactly about questioning the truth, questioning the facts. And again, I'm not expert in that domain, but this book I just showed is it's a good starting point around how this philosophy resulted in United States situation today. So again, in my readings, there is this first thing about calling to people's emotions instead of calling to people like reasoning part of the brain. The other thing, the second part, the second aspect, which is also very interesting, is the fragmentation of the population into like small bubbles. And here again, the social networks are responsible for a lot of this, because as we mentioned before, all the algorithms, whether it's on YouTube, on social networks, are made to give you what you like already, and are made to let you meet people which already agree with you. And again, this is not something new. There is plenty of literature about it, but that's a really, I mean, that creates a lot of what we call echo chambers. So people are in groups where they share already the same ideas instead of being exposed to different perspectives. And this is very detrimental to, in my mind, to like have a proper way to reflect on difficult issues, right? If you're only with people who look like you. And this creates a lot of groups that do not even know each other or do not even communicate with each other. And so in my mind, that's the two things that happen to reasoning. That's my question. What happened to reasoning? One is we are being manipulated to use emotions rather than reflection, first of all. And two, somehow people end up being fragmented in very small social groups, which are isolated one from each other. There is this other book. So this one is a French book again. So the title is, the title in English would be The French Archipelago. Archipelago is a set of islands. And I didn't think about this book because I read it maybe 2 years back, but then somehow while thinking about this topic, it came back to my mind. So this book talks about how the French society evolved in the last century and how it became very fragmented across many lines, social, political, and demographics and religious, whatever. So you have, again, in France, like many different groups. And one of the interesting observations is that if you go back 50 years back in the past, or in the 50s in France, it's a bit more than 50 years, 70 years back in the past, you will see a society where church has an important role. And you have left-wing groups like socialist or communist parties, which also played an important role. And it means that most of the population were in one or the other. Like people were going to the Christian mass on Sunday, or they were going to the political bureau on Sunday. Not all of them, but probably many of them. Or people were going to the bar. So people were spending time in the bar discussing together, right? And this has a name. There is a concept named the third place. In case you don't know about it, you can search, Google it. The third place is a concept which was created by some sociologists in the 80s. And the third place is a place which is not your home and which is not your work. It's a place like a church, a cafe, a club, where you spend time together. And it's meant to be important for civil society, democracy. Again, you can look at the Wikipedia article about third place. It explains that. And the fun story about third place is that the founders of Starbucks, they actually officially tried to build this third place. They were aware of this concept of third place, and they tried to build Starbucks as the ultimate third place where people would go between home and work. But there were these third places back then in France, churches, political parties, and these kind of disappeared. I mean, people are not going to the church anymore. People are not trusting political parties anymore. And people are not going to the bar anymore. The bars in Paris, most of them closed. You have some cafes, but probably they don't play the same role as bars where people were staying around the football table and discussing together. So that's what I collected from my readings. Again, I'm seeing only a very small part of the problem, but that's what I've collected.
So you think it's a bad thing that the third place is starting to it's getting extinct?
So that's a good question. Actually, I was asking myself whether a church is a good place to have.
Not only the church, but as you said, the third place, even the bar, you said any other cafe.
I feel like it's probably a bad thing. Yes.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if some of these third places could also be echo chambers, right? I imagine that some of these places might be filled with people who share the same opinion already.
Yeah.
And
exactly
might not have this diversity of perspective. Yeah. So if you have like social mixing somehow, I imagine that it's a good concept. If you have all the same kind of people going to the same place, it probably doesn't bring a lot to diversity of perspectives.
But I mean, do you think is it the fault of these tech giants like the algo people, or is it like the basic human nature of intolerance that has led to this particular situation of not being able to mix up? Because even if you, I mean, I also don't have the correct data to emphasize on this, but despite what the social media or the networking sites say, your physical world is a physical world. We are unable to gel or we are unable to mix on the physical world, so we cannot actually say that the social media is kind of a problem. I mean, if I'm saying it correctly, before the pandemic, there was an influx of immigrants in the Europe by Germany and France, and it's just what I've seen here on the news channel here in India, and a bit of these American news people who say that the French or maybe the German people are a bit of intolerant because the immigrants have the different culture, and there's a clash between the cultures, so they are not tolerant towards, both of them are not tolerant towards each other. So I mean, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. The question is which one is the cause of the other, right? I mean, is intolerance something that is built in human by nature, or is the intolerance the result of this lack of debating around is immigration a good thing or a bad thing? And instead you have these TV channels where people from the far right wing will just try to provoke and explain that, okay, immigrants are the cause for all our problems, right? So is really intolerance part of like what we are, or is it like a result of what is happening? Because if intolerance is the part of like what we are, it leaves little hope to solve these problems, right?
And
But back to your question around whether social media is responsible for all of it, it's of course difficult to say so. The reality, though, is that we now have a computer in our pocket, right, which was not true before.
Yeah.
TV was probably already responsible for people not spending a lot of time to reflect. But now we have a TV in our pocket when we ride the bus, when we walk, when we go to sleep. So it has some influence, obviously, over us. And again, the tech giants are mobilizing much of our time. I mean, if you try to count like how much time is spent across the world, multiplied by the number of people using services like Netflix, like Google, like Amazon, and it's a awful amount of brain power in the world, which is actually used by these tech giants. So it would not be true to say that they don't have a huge influence on how society evolves, even though they might not have a master plan. It's not part of a conspiracy, and actually how algorithms work are rationally do make sense for these companies, right? It makes sense for Amazon to recommend books based on what you like already, because yeah, I mean, probably you will be more satisfied this way than if Amazon gives you a book which tells the opposite of what you've read before. But the result, the compound effect, is that people are kind of locked up in like small bubbles unless they somehow have some discipline to think outside of the box. So that's my third part in this conversation, is what are the solutions? Is it like, do we have solutions at the individual level? And some of the books I read, the first one I mentioned is more about, oh, you should try to use more of your reasoning part of the brain instead of.
Before coming to the solutions, I wanted to ask, I was coming to solutions, but I wanted to ask one thing. In the beginning, you said these social media platforms targeting at your emotions. So is logical thinking and logical reasoning like as you're trying to saying it, as you're trying to say that it's a good thing, like obviously it is, but are you trying to say that we should suppress us emotions?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there are some challenges we have to face, which probably require a lot of like rational decisions.
So
And
that's what I'm trying to ask, that does logical reasoning require us to suppress our emotions? Do we need to suppress our emotions in order to think logically?
Emotions are part of a good decision-making process. Sometimes emotion help you making the right decisions.
Okay.
So it's not much about that, but again, you still need to base your decisions on facts, right? And sometimes some of the positions we hear, again, around climate change, pandemic, or so on, are probably easy to unbuild just by looking at the facts. So it's probably a mix of using facts and using emotions. But again, we are being guided towards like using emotions first. And again, the thing is, emotions makes you react faster than if you don't take enough time to make a decision, you will only use your emotions. If you take time, you will combine your emotions and like reason, like logical thinking. So you never get emotions out of the way. It's just that if you give it more time, you can pass a bit beyond the emotions and then like start also looking at the facts.
Okay. So coming back to the solutions, you were saying that what are the solutions?
So, well, why we need solutions, what we just said, there are some challenges that probably requires a lot of thinking. And if we believe in democracy, one of the conditions for democracy is something called the wisdom of crowds. So it's
Wisdom
the
of
idea, the wisdom of crowds,
crowds.
crowds, CROWD, the wisdom of
Crowds.
people.
Okay.
It's the idea that, I mean, the idea behind democracy is that people are informed enough. They don't know everything, but they are informed enough to like vote and make the right decisions, right? That's the idea. And if too many voters, they share a distorted view of the truth, it's a problem. It's a problem for this. I mean, this condition is unmet, right? And I recently I'm reading this book. Actually, I'm not done with it. It's kind of an interesting book, quite entertaining because it's a lot of data and results of surveys around what people know, which facts people are familiar with. It's US centric. It's surveys that run in the US, but it also talks a little bit about other countries. And I mean, what this book is about is that at an age today where a lot of facts can be Googled, can be looked up on internet, many people actually are shockingly ignorant of many facts because you don't need to remember everything because you can look it up on internet easily, right? You don't need to remember how is the population, how big is the population in your country, because you can look it up on Google. So most likely many people in India will not remember like how big is India or how many people live there. And of course, that's the same for US or France or whatever. So that's just an example. And people on top of that, that's what this book is about, are pretty poor at estimating big numbers like demographic statistics, budgets. It's pretty difficult for a human brain to make a difference between millions, billions, trillions. And so at the end in this book, it shows that people, especially in the US, because this is where this book is written, they are not familiar with how big is the US budget, how big is the debt, how big is the population and stuff like that. And so again, if you think that democracy is based on people being familiar with facts and making the right decisions, that's a risk. That's a risk if people, they are not able to have a good reasoning process based on enough facts, right? So solutions, I don't have solutions. I was just thinking, again, there might be individual solutions. As I said, the French book is encouraging the readers to use like the decision-making part of the brain rather than the emotional part of the brain. And we've been mentioning before third places. So my question is, are there like collective solutions? Do we need to have more of these places where people can meet together? Does it need to be physical places? Can it be virtual places? And how do we make sure it doesn't become another social network group where it's an echo chamber and you only get people who agree with you together? And actually, that's why also I was happy to make this podcast today. It's because kind of, in my mind, belongs to the solutioning, right? It's by bringing people from different backgrounds together and spend time actually focusing on one topic and trying to find solutions. So I don't know what you guys think.
But I mean, you've mentioned this a number of times that people should make decisions with based on proper facts. But you being one in an employee in one of the tech companies, how often do you feel? I mean, what's the probability as per your stats that a common man will have access to an unbiased data set for his own interpretation? Because it is you who has the data set, I mean the collection of the data. So it's very much possible that these companies or the data sources might be hampered, and again then you would be manipulating my decision in the end.
So I was specifically talking about like users of these technology companies, right? How they
Hmm.
can make the decisions. Well, that's difficult from a user perspective because again, I mean, if, as you said, these companies will be only showing you what they want to show you, right? And people, they don't even realize that if I make a Google search and you make the same Google search, we will be shown different things, right? And of course, on Facebook, I don't use Facebook, but if I use Facebook, I will see news that are different from what you will see.
Correct.
This is different, very difficult from a user perspective. So I think again, either it's on these companies to change how it works, but this is of course not under our control, or it is for everyone to diversify their sources of information. I think that's something that individually you can make, is to diversify your sources of information. And to be honest, books is a good source of information as well. Uh, and you can probably read the news from the country where you live, but also read news from the country where you come from, like me. So you can see different perspectives on the same problem. So it's up to the individual to diversify, I would say, rather than waiting for these companies to change their algorithms.
And just one last query from my end, and just taking a detour from the topic, uh, is it possible for a human to have a logical make a logical decision when it comes to his spiritual journey? I mean, what is your take on that? How can one use logic when it comes to one's spiritual journey?
Yeah, again, I think it relates to the question before, right? Whether we have to leave emotions out of the way when we make decisions. I think that probably you might need to compartmentalize a bit between your spiritual journey, which probably is very personal, and running the country, right? Which is likely a different topic. And that's what, to go back to France and what I was saying at the beginning, that's what France um, tried to build by having a clear separation between church and state. Okay, and that's something that took much time. We talked about the revolution, which was end of the 18th century, but the separation of church and state happened at the beginning of the 20th century. And what does it mean to separate church and state? It means that it's okay to have a spiritual path and to have a religion, but it's something personal and individual. When it comes to running a country, we shouldn't have like religious beliefs in the way. So it's not choosing one versus the other. It's just like segregating what belongs to like spiritual and religious from what belongs to uh, running running the country or running the group of people around you. So you don't have to choose. I think you have to segregate.
I mean, as far as I'm familiar with the Roman, not the Roman, but the Greeks, if I'm saying it correctly, the Greek people used to have this parliament type of thing where they used to all this parliament and this democracy was, I think, originated from the Greeks, whereby they would
Yeah.
come in and pull in their own views and then work upon the differences and try to move their country in a mutually beneficial. Despite we say we are living in a democracy, people do not have a say. Despite, we might say we are in bubbles or whatever, but the actual weightage that needs to be given in the hands of people is not given, be it in any democracy. So it's all about manipulation. I mean, a few years back there was this conspiracy theory that Facebook played a major role in manipulating Donald Trump's win, and I don't know, I don't know, but and even Russia was involved, and I don't know what mix was there. But again, coming back, that we need to have these local meetings at district level, wherein people at district level could meet and pool in their views, so that when we solve a problem at microscopic level, only then the macroscopic picture can change.
Yeah, and this depends a lot on each culture. That's why I can only testify for my background. I see in Singapore like different people coming from different country, and some people are you have cultures where people are congregating together and discussing together, happening more than in other cultures. But yeah, I can say that in my French culture, I've seen people being quite individualistic and yeah, not spending a lot of time together.
But I feel Singapore has too many bubbles itself. I mean, this Chinatown for Chinese people, Little India for the South Indian people, and there's some other hilly area, the posh area for the rich people. So I think Singapore has too many bubbles for a small size country.
Yeah, that's true. But interestingly, also the government has put in some rules to push for social mixing. Uh, so again, it's not whether you like or not Singaporean government, but the truth is in the housing plan, uh, there are rules in place to make sure that in the same area you have a certain quota of each subculture, right? So that you end up with a socially mixed country. So you end up having like people from Indian descent and Chinese descent and Indonesian descent in each area, though. So they were conscious of this problem at least.
If you're talking about the mixing of people that come from different social backgrounds, if that is to be done, then the biggest factor that plays a role in it is tolerance. So if the thing that you talked about, how there are social groups in which everyone has the same opinion and everyone is like-minded, and there's no one to challenge anyone, and no one to question anyone. This is because people are intolerant. If there was someone who has a different opinion, uh, maybe he or she or they are intolerant, and slowly they start to deviate from that group, and they start to find someone who's like-minded and have the same opinions of such as them. I said this thing in one of my before podcasts also, that people generally tend to say that religious people are very intolerant. I've seen people who are more intolerant than the religious ones who don't believe in religion also. Some people are very staunch about scientific facts. They think that if they've heard of some fact from somewhere, and they say that this is a scientific fact, they don't know that science is a study and it can be challenged as well. Some people are very staunch about the court or the government. They don't know that government is also by the people, and any law, any like any rule by the government can be challenged as well. They think that if someone has said that it is a scientific fact, it is not a word of God. So the basic thing to move this ahead is to reduce the intolerance in people, and the only thing that I can think of how it can be done is the content that is fed to the people has to be less intolerant. Like the news should be presented in such a way that it does not incite people. The any sort of media that people consume should not be such that it should be inciting. Like a few days ago, if you saw that the final between England and it was between England and Italy.
Italy.
So yeah, when England lost, the fans got so incited that they started beating up the Italy fans. So it is like this is the height of intolerance, that they cannot tolerate a loss for their country. So, and that too at a sports game.
Yeah. I mean, intolerance is obviously the root of all evil. I agree. I do believe that knowledge and exposure helps with that.
Yeah.
Why I say that is because I've seen in my country the rise along the years of the far right. It's been there since I'm a child, to be honest. But they have been in the final round of presidential elections twice in the last decade, right? And the last presidential election, again, the far right candidate was part of the final. So it's rising, whether we like it or not. And what we used to see on TV, and again, it's one perspective, is you have a lot of people from rural areas in France who are voting for far right. And the truth is, when we ask them the question, like, okay, so you are against immigration, so you think that people from a certain region of the world are a threat, but is there any such people in your small village? Well, there isn't, right? I mean, I'm in a rural village in France. I'm not exposed to immigration, but still I'm against it, right? So it kind of makes me believe that ignorance and lack of exposure creates intolerance, right? Rather than I'm intolerant because I'm exposed to people who do disagree with me and I don't like them. I
Yeah.
think it's not exactly like that. I think it's I don't know these people, so I'm being intolerant because I'm kind of afraid of them. I don't know them, right? So I think exposure, knowledge helps with solving intolerance.
Yes.
And another thing, what you are saying is having less intolerant content in the news. Well, the problem is when you watch the news, at least it's made by professional journalists, but people are not watching the news. People are getting their news from Facebook groups, right, today. And these are not journalists. These are anonymous internet users and
Yeah.
haters and people who can say anything they want on Twitter. And this is why it's so intolerant. It's because people, they get their information from non-professional, anonymous internet haters. That's the reality. So it doesn't help, obviously.
Even you're absolutely right. It may be true for some countries that the professional journalists don't present the news in such a way, but coming from from where we are, the mainstream media, the mainstream news has uh, become so what do we
Opinionated. Opinionated.
opinionated also, and it incites people to such an extent. It is very like, I'm not getting words to express myself, but uh, it creates a lot of frustration within people. It's
Yeah.
yeah, like the journalists, the TV journalists are literally shouting at top of their voices. So it's not a uh, good thing in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. This is also something that, yeah, I observed and I read about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting.
So anything else you'd like
Uh,
to say?
that's all. I mean, we would surely share some clips with the news, how we presented news here. Maybe that would give you some good entertainment in Singapore.
Yeah. Anything you'd like
Yeah.
to say?
Well, I think we've had a intensive 45, 50-minute session now.
Yeah.
So
Anything you'd like to conclude by?
again, I think today's discussion, the objective was probably not to find the solutions,
Yeah.
but just make sure that we bring this topic to people like listening to us. I think it's an important topic. I honestly think it's a threat on how our generation and the next generation can solve like the big challenges we are facing. So I think the society in general, they need to find a solution to what's happening today, like as we said, with social media, with news, and with people living in their small bubble. So yeah, I think it's an important problem to solve. And yeah, one of the solution is probably to have enough people aware of this.
Yeah.
So let's hope at least it helps in
Yeah.
that way.
Awareness is the key.
Yeah, probably yes.
Nice. So I think we'll end our podcast here.